Our next speaker will be Tony, and he will be taking us or speaking on difference between European and Canadian approach for cyber security. And I'll quickly go through some brief introduction of Tony just to give you an idea of his background. Um, so Tony has good number of certification course in ethical hacker, and is currently working with the first company here in Canada, solely focusing on red hack offensive attack. And so Tony previously responsible for working with a dedicated red team for ethical hacking with the Dutch Healthcare Network. Yeah, and just as I said, he's an offensive security certified professional and also offensive wireless professional certified. And so it's a privilege to honor Tony, and I hope we're going to learn greatly from him. And yeah, join me once more to welcome Tony as I hand over the mic to him.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming here today. It's nice to see so many faces, and the sun is out. Everything is great. It's a beautiful day. And today I'm going to talk to you about some of my experiences and as a comparison between European approaches and Canadian approaches for cybersecurity. Some of the trends that I've noticed. For example, this last year, you probably have heard of some of the major notable hacks that's happened in North America, such as Ticketmaster, MGM, and London Drugs, all of which have incurred very, very significant damages to the companies, as well as costs, a lot of hidden costs, reputational damage. Their insurance rates are probably skyrocketing. Also, in particular, I want to talk about like MGM in Vegas because when they suffered a hack, they shut down absolutely everything, right? And imagine a big operation like MGM, all their resorts, all their casinos, everything was shut down, right? Not moving at all. Imagine how much money they're bleeding per day, right? So just from that alone, I could tell as a cybersecurity professional that they did not do any network segmentation and that is one of the key basic principles for cybersecurity. If you separate your network into smaller and smaller chunks, so they're all separated from each other, if a hacker compromises one of them, you don't have to shut everything else down. They're all isolated, right? So that's just one of the examples that I see that I'm like, hey, started looking more into other companies in Alberta, other stories in Alberta. And then I started noticing somewhat of a trend, the differences between Europe and Canada. So today I'm going to give you a little introduction, and we're going to actually look at some statistical differences between Canadian companies and European companies. And for Europe, I'm particularly going to choose the Netherlands as my example because that is known as the digital gateway to Europe. So they're, as you can say, a little step above the rest compared to the average. And also statistically, it's easier to get clearer numbers if it's just one country instead of like every country. We're also going to look at some cost benefit analysis as well. I will give you some basic introduction to some really popular frameworks and standards if you are ever interested in upping your cybersecurity game, but you're not sure where to start. And for those of you that show up, I know this is not a part of the description, but this is a nice bonus. I'm actually going to go through one of the actual targets that I pen tested and I compromised from start to finish. I'm going to show you how a hacker thinks, what a hacker looks for, typically throughout the whole process of an actual hack. So then hopefully that can be somewhat interesting to you people as well. So this is catered, this presentation is catered for everybody, whether you're a personal background, business background, or like a technical background. I'm hoping that you can all benefit something, get something out of this presentation. And then at the very end, I'll have a Q&A session. I did allocate time for it. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm also available after this talk. So if you want to come up and talk later, we can talk outside, So me, I was pretty much raised in Alberta. I spent most of my youth and adulthood in Alberta. I graduated from the U of A in 2015. Actually, I studied civil engineering back in the day, so I wasn't even in IT. But my passion has always been in computing, and especially when it comes to anything related to hackers. Like, it's always fascinating to me, like, how are these people finding all these exploits and getting into these places? So, due to practical reasons, I chose engineering as my original path, but I finally decided to take the plunge and make the career change, because that's where my true passion lies, is in cybersecurity and coding related. But as a result of my engineering, I did do many years of project management, which gave me a lot of valuable skills for the business side of things, of how company and projects, cash flow and all that operates. And when I went to Europe, I'm just going to give you a quick intro on red team versus blue team. Basically, if you're not familiar with the concept, blue team is essentially more or less about defense in cybersecurity. Setting up firewalls, good antivirus, good log monitoring, all that's considered blue team. And red team, as a contrast, is all about attacking. Like, basically, you're simulating cyber attacks. You're like, okay, how do I attack and penetrate and get deeper into the system? So in Europe, I went to some cybersecurity conferences there, and I've noticed that about 20 to 30 of the companies there, they did nothing but red team and pen testing. That is all they did. Like, they did not do any blue team work, right? And then after I moved back to Canada, I was a little surprised to find that that pretty much doesn't exist in Alberta, as far as I can tell. All the cybersecurity companies in Alberta pretty much entirely do just blue team. Some offer some pen testing and red teaming services, but the vast majority of companies here just do only blue team. And I also started to notice, after talking to some companies and some professionals, that it's actually kind of rare in Alberta for companies to employ any sort of red team exercise. So that really drew my attention. I started digging in deeper to see, what this all means, and why is there such a difference between Canada and uh, Europe, for example. And here are some of my findings. Now, I was raised in Alberta, so in a way, I feel very attached to Alberta. I like to see Alberta do well, right? It raised me, and now I want to see it succeed too. So some of these stats that I found was rather alarming, I would say. Like, for example, this one, you can see just at a quick glance, there's a huge difference between Canadian companies and Dutch companies when it comes to red teaming and pen testing. And there's a multitude of reasons that contribute to the difference in these two numbers. And there are also sources, if you want to take a look, there are pretty recent statistics. And I would say the biggest reasons are partly government influence and culturally influenced. Overall speaking, I've noticed that in Europe, it's a more planned, proactive kind of culture compared to what we have. So they like to take proactive measures on absolutely everything. They like to go over on the planning aspect, and instead of waiting for something to happen and then deal with it. Whereas there's pros and cons to both ways of handling things. Whereas I feel like we're a bit more chill. Like, more like, let's just see what happens until shit hits a fan. Then we'll look at it and we'll see how to deal with that, right? So, and also because the Dutch companies are their gateway to Europe, so a lot of European countries use software from the Dutch government, right? Or not this the government, Dutch companies, and as a reason, the Dutch government has tighter grip on what is required. What are the steps necessary to ensure that everybody's data is handled in a responsible manner? So there's bigger push on the government. There's bigger push from the culture, and as a result, we're seeing that right now, like 12% of Dutch companies. This 12%, I put a star beside it because it's 12% of Dutch companies don't have a policy in place requiring pen tests. So it doesn't mean they don't do pen tests. It just means they don't have a required policy stating they have to do this. So only 12% of companies don't require pen tests, but a lot of this 12% are still doing pen tests. It's just not a part of their company policy. So the real number is probably less than 10% for Dutch companies. Now, why should you care that Canadian organizations and Dutch organizations are so different? Because unfortunately, for a lot of companies, they only take cybersecurity seriously once something goes wrong, once an incident happens. And this is why. This should tell you a lot about the differences between Canadian organizations and Dutch organizations. This is the average cost, both taken, one from 2023 and one is within the last year from the Dutch government website. The average cost for a Canadian organization during an actual cyber attack or a cyber incident costs a company roughly $7 million. And an average incident for a Dutch company, a Dutch organization, is less than $500,000 in Canadian. It was 300,000 euros. So I had to do a little bit of conversion. And this is ultimately your, like, which bill would you rather be paying, right? Like, you look at these two, like, and the average cost for a pen test, a quality pen test, is anywhere from 5,000 to 100,000. Depends on the scope, depends on the complexity of your network, and so on and so forth. This is just the average, the industry average for a pen test for any organization in Canada. This is also your ROI comparing to this. This is the ROI you're looking at, right? And quality really matters for a pen test because you could be out there hiring some Joe from the internet, right? And they'll do a pen test for you. They'll write a pretty report for you that says everything is fine in your system. But did they actually find everything that need fixing? So a quality pen test really matters. And this is the cost for a quality pen test. There's just no cheap ways around it. Now, I have an OSCP certification, and whether you get it through me or through someone else, I highly, highly recommend you look for at least OSCP for your next penetration testing. The reason for that is because in the OSCP final exam, you're essentially given 24 hours blind and you don't know what you're getting into, and they give you 6 targets, and you have to hack all 6 targets to pass this exam. And you have to write a very good detailed pen testing report showing step by step how you got there. That's the only way to pass that exam. That's also why it's one of the hardest exams for pen testing. And if you ask anybody that does pen testing or red teaming, you know this is not an easy cert to get. So between pen testing, generally speaking, there's 3 types of pen tests. There's black box, white box, which as the name implies, a black box is something that keeps the pen tester completely in the dark. This does the best job mimicking a true cyber attack because the tester has no idea what they're getting themselves into, and they have to do all the poking and prodding and everything to figure everything out on their own. The issue with this is that it could be very time consuming, and it's likely for some vulnerabilities to get missed. And the reason for that is, let's say you have very, very good initial access control. So the pen tester never even got access to one of your machines, right? So fantastic job. Like, your initial access control is great, and the report is all clean. But what if you have privilege escalations exploits, so that if one of your computer gets compromised, the hacker can exploit to higher privilege users and do more damage from that point on. So stuff like that, a black box may not always find. Whereas a white box is the polar opposite, where it's complete open book, all credentials, all logins, and even sometimes source codes are all released to the ethical hacker. This, you get the most comprehensive and usually the best coverage for everything. But there's a lot of information needed for this, and there's a lot of communication, and that also could end up being a time-consuming process. What's most popular for pen testing, and this also applies in Europe, is the gray box. So a gray box simulates essentially limited access to machines and information For example, giving you access as if you would to one of the lowest privileged users on your network, on your company. So it's like the lowest low, and you just give them access to this one computer or a one IP address. From there, then the testing begins. It simulates as if what would have happened if one of your employees clicked on something they shouldn't have and compromised their computer, downloaded something they shouldn't have, and somehow managed to get one machine compromised. And then we can look at the extent of the attack and where it all goes, and so on and so forth. Now, combining all the technical skills that I've have and project management, I can write a very good detailed report that's like more business focused compared to just technical. For example, one of the tests I did was actually a physical access pen testing, where I found out that the entire office tower of 30 floors or so, they were using a keycard access system that could be copied in 30 seconds. So that was fairly simple to copy. Like, and anybody, say in a company gathering or at somebody's house party, could have easily copied the key card and then access the building. So, but in order to upgrade all their key cards, they also have the option to upgrade their key card readers. But that costs a lot of money. It doesn't make any sense at the time because their key card reader was good enough to get a slight upgrade from their current cards. And if you're just upgrading cards, not the card readers, it's a lot lower in cost, right? So that's what we suggested, because the next level upgrade was, at the time, now it's copyable, but at the time it wasn't possible to copy that. So that's just one of the things we did, and just to show the client, what is the value in doing this, basically. Now, would you do this pen tests typically? Like, would you do this? Okay, before we get into frameworks, pen tests, a lot of companies think, there's never like a good time because I need to set time aside. I need to set time for the IT department. Everybody needs to prepare for it. I'm just gonna do it when it's convenient for me. But the thing is, does a hacker ever hack you at a convenient time, right? So it's also something to think about. So, and if you're new to this, right, you're new to the whole pen test red team, this is something you never even heard of, and you're wondering, where can I start? These are some really good starting points if you just want to get your foot on the ground, like get it going. I'm not going to go too deep into these but I will talk them a little bit about them so you can know where you stand. And this is something that your IT department, if you're an IT manager or if you run an IT department or have an IT department, this is something really worth looking into for them. The difference between frameworks and standards is that the framework doesn't tell you that you have to do this. A framework simply goes, this is what you currently have, and this is what we think is best for you to do right now. So there's no legal requirement for you to follow those, and it's easy to pick up and easy to incorporate into your current company system. You can do as much as little as you want. And standards, however, is something that's a bit more paperwork focused. For example, you need to get regular audits, and it's like you have to have the A, B, and C check boxes. Everything goes on. Everything needs to be perfect in order for you to get that standard, get that certification. The NIST 2.0 actually is, if any of you is one of the earlier talks, you probably already heard a little bit about it. But I highly, highly recommend NIST, because this to me is, and they recently came out with this 2.0 system, and this was just like in the last year or so. Before this, they had an older system that was still good to follow, but this is like the most popular system that North American peoples follow. And this is something that I'm not going to do for you. This is something that's for your IT department manager and for them to be looking into, because this is a whole IT department type of thing. And this goes into a lot of different sections, including for pen tests that would be mostly falling under the detect, identify, and those two categories. So that's where my expertise are in this. OWASP is another very popular one. These are all internationally like well-recognized good standards and frameworks. This is another framework, so you don't have to do what it says. But there's a lot of open source resources for this one. So essentially, the top security researchers of the world, top coders, they all get together and they constantly updating this database to show you what are the top 10 most likely vulnerable security risks for web applications. This is entirely just for web applications. So if you're running any type of web applications, I highly recommend that you look into this. The ISO 27001 is international. This is a standard, and this is pretty serious deal. To get this, there's a lot of paperwork. I would say this is not suitable for beginners and small companies. This is something that you probably want to start looking into as your company becomes really more and more complex, because to get this, there's a lot of controls and measurements you have to put in place and audits necessary before you can finally get this. But once you get this, it really does show that you take cybersecurity very seriously to the next level that a lot of companies simply couldn't. And it also allows you to be able to advertise this and potentially get discounts and insurance on. It shows you're more trustworthy to all your clients, all that kind of good stuff. But it is something I wouldn't recommend for smaller companies. This is very, very involved process. Okay, so that concludes the first part of my presentation. And next, I'm going to go through the actual hack that I did perform myself. This part is going to be a bit more technical, so I hope you enjoy the hacker's perspective. So obviously, I will be redacting a lot of information because this was an actual target. So you're not going to see everything, but you'll see enough to know what I did. Generally speaking, when a hacker begins hacking on a target, the first thing is a port scan. That's like one of the most basic things. There are a lot of tools for it. Nmap, for example, you might have heard of. And there's a lot of different ways you can use Nmap. You can make port scans undetectable, completely undetectable. Doesn't matter what kind of software, firewall, or log monitoring you set up. You can do port scans in a stealthy manner that doesn't reveal your identity in any way. It doesn't reveal questionable traffic. Generally, after you find out what ports are open, the next step is to dig into it and see what services are running. So from this scan, you can't really see it, but the third white bar from the top, it showed a particular service that I've never heard of before. And it was running on a weird port number too. So then I started looking into that. I was like, what is this, right? And from a very simple research, it didn't take me long, 2 minutes max, I found this GitHub repository specifically with an exploit for this service. And it was a Python script. So I downloaded this, saved it locally. I just called mine test.py. I didn't even modify the code. And generally speaking, a lot of the exploits involve you having to edit the code a little bit before you can run them. This one I didn't even have to run. I just ran it straight against the target, and then bam, it told me it got me a shell. So I was like, oh, interesting. And I tested it out through that link, and sure enough, I had a web shell just like that. It was very surprising, very fast. This whole process took no more than 5 minutes. I had a web shell going. And from the web shell, I could tell that they're running Windows 10. So now I know I'm dealing with Active Directory and so on and so forth. So the first thing I wanted is to get a full access shell from my Kali machine. That's my own personal laptop, so that I can have a full interaction with the target computer from my computer. So that's the first thing I did. I started a reverse shell. On the top right, you can see I just used Netcat. I started a simple HTTP server to prepare a little reverse shell virus. It's very, very small, doesn't take much space. And then I executed this command on the web shell, which basically tries to download the virus from my machine and then executes it. And then when that happened, bam, I got a connection. So suddenly now I'm connected to this client computer. Now in Windows computers, there's 4 levels of privilege of access. This is level 2. So now I have level 2 access to this target. After that, I immediately started running to see if I can anyway escalate privilege. So I ran some vulnerability scanner scripts. I have quite a few in my arsenal. One of them turned out and it shed that it found some uncoded service path. And for those of you that don't know what this is, this means one of the paths for a system running program is not enclosed in a quotation. And how Windows works is that if you don't enclose it in a full quotation, it will actually try to look for that executable in the directory, in the first directory, like in this case, C drive. It'll try to look for it there. And if it doesn't find it, and then it'll go into program files, look for it there, and so on and so forth, until it eventually finds that executable and execute it. And because of that, all I had to do was create this virus, another simple reverse shell, just to get another connection. And I called it the same name as the executable. I put it in the folder before the actual folder. And that's all I did. And I started another netcat listener waiting for this to catch. And all I had to do was reboot that computer. So when it tried to load this system program, it would try to execute my virus instead. And sure enough, I got another connection. And WhoAmI reviews that I now have level 4 access, which is the highest level access to this system. So now the first target has been fully compromised, and I basically can do anything I want to this computer. With basically, it's open. It's all open up to me now. So the first thing I did, obviously, is stop all antivirus, stop all firewalls. I ran all these commands to absolutely disable everything, so then I can have free control over anything I wanted to this machine. And I also changed using that user, I changed the administrator password so that just to make things easier, I can have an RDP session as an administrator to this machine. Administrator, by the way, is level 3, but it's good enough for most things. But yeah, I already shut everything down using level 4, so level 3 was good enough to be able to have a working interface. So it makes everything just easier from that point on. So the next thing I did was to upload this program called Mimikatz. And some of you who are technical might know about this. It's a very popular, powerful, I guess, tool that you can use to extract hashes and whatnot. It interacts with Kerberos and all the Windows 10 authentication system. And it can try to extract as many hashes as possible for anyone that has ever used that computer, for example. So from that, ran the program, and I managed to find this one user with this password hashes, and I found that she was a domain user for another computer. This computer is hidden from me. Only the internal company network can access that computer, so I couldn't directly access it. But using this first computer as pivot, right, I was able to at least see the second computer. And now I have this domain user and her hashed password. I tried cracking it, and unfortunately, this person used an unsecure password. So I cracked it pretty quickly. So that gave me access to a second machine in the network. And this is further into the internal network that I don't normally, I can't ping it, say, for example, from my Kali machine. So I started another RDP session as this user, and I connected to the second machine. Now I have level 2 access to a second machine in the internal network. And this one is more hidden than the first one because it's not public. It's only within the internal IP. From there, one of the things that I found that was interesting was that in C/users, I was just looking around to see what's interesting. And I found this one username inside C/users that I've never seen before. So the first thing I did is I looked up this username and I did a search using command prompt. And it told me that this person is a domain admin. That suddenly became my key focus for the rest of this engagement, because a domain admin has the power to set privilege for all users. So they're the top boss. So I saw that. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the guy I need to focus on. And immediately I started doing the same thing again. I started checking to see if there's any way I can escalate privilege on the second machine so that I can try to extract some password hashes for this domain admin, right? And I did everything. Eventually, I did manage to find a modifiable binary That should never happen, by the way. But there was a user modifiable binary that was run by system. So that's a level 4. So because of that, I copied this binary file and basically I added a virus, essentially a tiny, tiny virus. So this program would still run as normal. That, it would still behave pretty much exactly the same. You wouldn't even notice a difference. But I added the tiny little reverse shell virus into it. And so the file is slightly bigger than the original file. And I basically uploaded that and overwrote the old binary file, did the same thing, did a reboot, and I used the first computer. I also uploaded Netcat to the first computer because I can do anything I want to that first computer now. So I started reverse shell on that first computer because they're in the same network just to make things easy. And I was able to catch a system level shell, level 4, to that second computer after this. And after this, obviously, I just went straight for password hash grabbing and everything. And I did find a password hash for this domain admin. I got so happy, so excited. I was like, oh my God, I'm this close to being like totally dominating this entire network, right? But this domain admin is a bit more skilled in IT. He has a good password. I tried for hours. I couldn't crack it. I kept trying. I couldn't crack this password. I even looked at their company policies for their passwords and tried to come up with custom word lists. Couldn't do it. It was just, this guy is good. He made a good password. So good password really did make a difference. I couldn't get in, right? So then I started having to try other things. But I know, so because there's a domain admin, I know there's a domain controller somewhere on the network. I found what this domain controller's IP address is, but it was so well hidden, I couldn't ping it. I couldn't even ping it using the internal network. It was responding to nothing I was trying. So I couldn't see any open ports. I couldn't see anything to it. Man, I was like, what do I do? So I just kept trying different techniques after different techniques. Eventually, I tried this technique called overpass the hash, which also uses a program that's publicly available. It's called BSides, and it allows you to execute a command or a program on a remote computer. This is something that you can find. BSides is just a free utility program you can download from the official Microsoft website. So using this program and a combination of a couple other things, as you can see, after all these code, suddenly it said BSides, execute process and everything. It looked like it did something. And then when I check who am I again, suddenly I'm the domain controller. And I'm on the domain controller computer. And I've just fully compromised the entire network. So, guess now that I have full compromise to the entire network because I've got the domain controller, I can control any machine I want. I can give myself level 4 access to any machine I want. Essentially, if you think about it, I can extract all client information, banking information. I can just crypto lock the entire network if I wanted to, and then demand a ransom to unlock it. I could even just go screw it, delete everything. I can delete everything on every computer if I wanted to. And did I do any of this? No, obviously not. What do you think a hacker would do if a hacker found this? Right? So instead of doing any of that, I wrote a very detailed report highlighting all my findings and ways to fix these, because every one of these vulnerabilities are fairly easy to fix. A lot of these vulnerabilities you find, it's actually really simple to fix. It's just some minor misconfiguration. That's something that could take less than a day for the IT department to fix. It's just a matter of finding it in the first place. Now, what do you think? Unethical hackers sees this, right? Some stuff like unsecure passwords and using some sort of niche service without first checking to see if that service has vulnerabilities. Stuff like this is what we call really low hanging fruits. And hackers, ethical or unethical, doesn't matter. We love low hanging fruits. We absolutely love them because that just makes our life so easy on everything. And but if you do get these low-hanging fruits fixed, then you're going to become one of the highest hanging fruits. And that's what my company do. I run a startup company. We focus nothing but just red team and pen testing, specializing in this only. And whether you go through us or go through someone else, we can make you the highest hanging fruit in the pack, so that the hacker sees your network, they're going to be like, this is not worth my time. They're going to move on to the next low hanging fruit. Typically, that's just how it works. And there's a lot of signs for low hanging fruits. A lot of signs. For example, something like seeing a website that's under construction, or seeing a link or a certain service somewhere that you're able to access and get a response back. Some sort of a backend server that's like testing, obviously looks like a testing environment, or default pages. If we see any sort of network or services set up that's just got a default page open, let's say Nginx default page, or even Jensen's, or whatever default page. We see a default page, hackers get excited about that, because default page can mean potential default credentials that hasn't been changed yet, and stuff like that. We love seeing those things. We love poking at those things to see where we can take that. So that is everything I have for you today. We covered some statistical comparison. As you can see that, we're looking at somewhere between half Canadian companies versus less than 10% of Dutch companies, and how that translated to 7 million versus $500,000. And there's just companies after companies in the Europe landscape just dedicated to just red team and nothing else. And I figured, Alberta, we could use that too. And the numbers show. So and I've shown you the demo. So any questions? This is your time. Okay, let's start from this, and then see over there the second.
One thing I found, having tried doing consulting in Alberta and such, the reason you're not finding a lot of pen test companies in Alberta is because geographically we're huge and very small population. Most of those companies tend to be in Vancouver or Toronto, and that because that's near the head offices for the companies.
Yep.
The companies they're in Alberta are usually like a field office, headquartered in Toronto.
Yeah.
Whoever is procuring in Toronto hires somebody there, sends them on a plane rather than hiring somebody who's like just down the block, that would be cheaper.
Yeah.
And also, are you hiring?
I actually, I am looking for a sales and marketing partner.
That would not be me.
But I am also, if you have OSCP certification, I do have a couple clients right now. But as the work becomes more, if you have any sort of OSCP certification, I'm interested in hearing from you. So that is the next step. Yeah. And for, as your point, your question was, is a comment. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. I also feel like, we were kind of raised as, we're started out as oil and gas heavy, right? We were never the tech central of Canada. And the field offices, exactly. Yeah. So I think as a result of that, we're a little bit behind when it comes to tech on some aspects. And this is one of those aspects. And I strongly believe that, now there is more money coming into Alberta. People are taking cybersecurity more seriously. I'm confident that we are on the right track to evolve and become better. And that 7 million is going to start dropping like year after year. I'm sure of it. So next question.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. So during your demo, right, you
Yeah.
were able to disable the antivirus solution.
Yeah.
And then you were able to use certain tools.
Yes.
To, like pass the hash.
Yeah.
For a standard network or an enterprise that has all the security controls in place, like MDE, like Sentinel.
Yeah.
would you be able to confidently say you'll be able to run all of this, in it? Because I don't really know the kind of network
Yeah.
maybe it's a small, as a SMB, a small business.
Yeah.
So I do not think, it's possible for you. I'm just thinking perhaps, or maybe so what I'm trying to find out is, was there an absence of those security controls that allowed you to be able to, exploit some of the vulnerabilities that you were able to,
Yeah, no, these targets, they actually have antivirus and firewalls set up in place.
Okay.
So when I first gained level 2 access, I couldn't do much except looking for ways to escalate my privilege.
Okay.
So I was trying to get to level 3 and 4, right? That's the first thing I try to do. As soon as you get to level 4, you can disable anything.
Okay. So at that point of disabling, was there like a trigger on the MDE solution? Did they have an MDE solution that saw that the anti-malware was disabled? Because for some MDEs, trigger the alert that somebody has disabled something.
Yes.
Sends it.
That is possible. Yes. You could set it up so that as a blue team, that's part of the blue team exercises to see what do you detect and what you not detect, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. So you're correct. Yes. You can set up controls in place to detect those kind of things.
Thank you.
Next. Yeah.
So question on the differences between the $7 million and the $500,000 between Alberta and Holland. And so do you think there's a difference in the number of breaches that get reported, as maybe the lower value ones in Alberta are less reported? So we only get...
Yeah, I think that there's definitely these statistics are not going to be absolutely precise, perfect. So I think smaller breaches may not get reported as much. But this report was done by CDW, so they're a pretty big organization. They're pretty reputable. I think even if there are numbers that weren't reported, this should give us a general idea, because the number that's being reported in the Dutch government they have the similar struggle, right? Like not every tiny incident is reported. They can't guarantee 100% report rate, but there's still a huge, huge difference, right, between them and us.
Hi. Do you think it's just a question of maturity between the Europeans and North America? Because you look at the GDPR, for example, is kind of the latest version, but they've had some pretty severe penalties and protections around privacy, which probably has an effect on companies investing in this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Sorry. So then your question is because of
that has an effect on why they're more mature and why they're further along this than some of the other factors.
I think, definitely. But I think mostly it's probably stems from the Dutch being kind of the pioneer for tech. So a lot of countries, other organizations in Europe started using their software as service. And because of that, regulations, both local government and foreign government, all that needs to be in place. So there's just tighter controls and everything. So I think that's probably the bigger main reason. And then what you mentioned also, I would think is another reason for it as well. I think I saw another question there. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Dave Malone, Program Manager, City Edmonton, CISO. Just a question on your red team startup company. How do you limit your liability on your testing? Because North America is pretty litigious, right?
Yeah. The basic thing is obviously there's basic insurance, and the second thing I try to do that is the scope of engagement, rules of engagement. For example, we'll never do DDoS, right? We'll never do anything that could potentially shut down the whole network. And if we do find some sort of exploit, usually if there's like a 5% chance this could crash something, it usually says so in the exploit as well. And stuff like that would be like communicating back and forth before we run anything risky, right? With the IT department going, hey, there's this we found, 5% chance something could go wrong. How do you want to test this? And just communicate. Maybe you can set up like a temporary Docker mock environment or something where we can test the script and see if this generates something interesting, and so on and so forth. Just to try to do a lot of communication and try not to touch anything risky, and also have insurance as a final backup.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I think this is time for me.
Yeah, thank you once more, Tony.
Yeah.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'll be outside and we can chit chat more.
Yeah, we can meet him outside. Thank you on behalf of the team.